Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight for another very important community conversation. We're continuing to listen as you share your thoughts, ideas, and stories. Everyone involved in the process of assessing and prioritizing information and data will thoroughly consider your input, and we appreciate it. We'll start the meeting tonight with an introductory video, and after the video, Human Relations and Community Services Director Kim Coleman will give an overview of tonight's meeting and introduce all the presenters. Thank you to all the presenters that will be here tonight. We have a great panel of folks and are looking forward to the conversation. For the last 32 years, Director Kim Coleman has served as a nonprofit executive director, consultant, and has had significant experience in organizational development. She now serves as the City of Lansing's Director of Human Relations and Community Services, and she will facilitate this discussion. So Kim, take it away. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Mayor Andy Shore. Many thanks to each of you for joining us tonight for this important discussion. Throughout this nation, a disproportionate number of people of color have been victims of excessive use of force at the hands of police. In addition, historically, people of color have been discriminated against in the workplace, within our communities, and in society in general. Mr. George Floyd died at the hands of 4 police officers who've been charged in his death. Soon after Mr. Floyd died, social justice protests emerged in cities and towns in America and throughout the world. Protesters have marched in the name of justice and equity, calling for the elimination of racism and discrimination in communities, workplaces, and in society in general. Many corporate, government, organizational, and individual leaders have now taken steps to examine brands, policies, procedures, and practices in an effort to address racism and discrimination and to work toward achieving equity. The public response in the aftermath of the videotaped George Floyd murder has rekindled and intensified the national call for reform and the need to have an honest dialogue to address systematic racism and its impact on African Americans and other communities of color. In response to concerns raised within the Lansing community that are consistent with concerns that have been raised throughout the nation, I've taken steps to change policies, having recently released my Racial Justice and Equity Community Action Proposals. My administration is hard at work taking immediate actions and working on next steps and long-term planning. Please know that I continue to listen to you. I hear you, and I want to hear more. We need your input. We're continuing to examine our policies, practices, and procedures, understanding that when assessing this type of examination, we need widespread input and advice from a diverse range of people who live, work, and visit Lansing. That's why I'm seeking your input through your participation in this community input meeting. We'd also like for you to complete a survey that's available on the city's website. Please share your experiences and stories with us. For additional assistance, I've established the Mayor's Racial Justice and Equity Alliance, and I've appointed a group of highly talented individuals who live and work in Lansing to review all of your input while assessing policies, practices, and biases to gain a deeper understanding of how to end any violence, racism, and racial discrimination in Lansing. The Alliance will develop a racial justice and equity plan for the city. We all want to ensure that the city's plan is community-inspired. That's why we need your input. The Alliance will be co-chaired by Kimberly Coleman, Director of the Department of Human Relations and Community Services for the city, and Police Chief Daryl Green. Teresa Bingman, a Lansing attorney with extensive legal and policy experience in civil rights, criminal justice, and social action, will work with the committee as an expert consultant. This conversation provides essential dialogue between police, City Hall, and our community. We need to engage with you, the community, to obtain a full understanding of the issues and priorities. We also have to reaffirm the fundamental principles of policing and build trust while improving the police-community relationship. We know that police reform and racial justice work are interrelated, and these two concepts must coexist to produce, advance, and enact meaningful public policy changes and public safety reforms in our communities. Thank you for your interest in helping Lansing, Michigan's capital city, achieve the goals of racial justice and equity.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for the introduction, Mayor. It is indeed an honor to serve as moderator for the City of Lansing's community conversation. Before we get started, I'd like to extend a personal thank you to Hope Rollins, owner of Hope for All Occasions, LLC, for the outstanding video presentation. The video captures those events that brought us to this point. Every frame had its own meaning that served as a historical message, a reminder to us of how far we've come as it relates to racial justice and equity in America, and yet how much further we still have to go. The time is now, and we should not stop until we have achieved racial justice and equity in Lansing and beyond. As you know, our vision is to create a racial justice and equity plan, a roadmap for how we will level the racial justice playing field and achieve equity, and to improve police policies and practices and police interactions. Our vision also includes encouraging other institutions to take up this challenge with us to address the issues that we identify in our plan. When listening to the video, you heard about the special advisory group that the mayor has appointed, the Mayor's Racial Justice and Equity Alliance. This group of talented individuals who represent city government, various industries, and community-based groups will be critical in putting this roadmap together. But it can't happen without you, Lansing. We need you, and we need your input to help ensure that we are fully aware of the priorities of the community. Tonight, we continue the process of listening to you, members of Lansing community, to gather ideas, stories, and experiences that will inform the work of the Racial Justice and Equity Alliance. This evening, we will also provide you information about Racial Justice and Equity Plan and to offer an overview of race relations and challenges in the City of Lansing as we know them. The information that we receive from you tonight will be combined with information from other town hall meetings, focus groups, and electronic surveys. In addition to listening and speaking up tonight, we urge you to go to the city's website that will be displayed at the end of the meeting to access the electronic survey. We will also provide a telephone number and other contact information at the end of this meeting. Please let us hear from you. Here, your voice matters. Joining me tonight are panelists Dr. Maxie Jackson, Joseph Graves, attorney Anita Hitchcock, attorney Teresa Bingman, and Dr. Daryl Green. Each will give a short presentation, and you will have an opportunity to ask specific questions of the panelists before moving to the next speaker. After the presentations, you, members of the audience, and I will pose questions to the panel members. If an audience member would like to ask a question or comment, you will raise your hand and I will invite you into the conversation. You will have the option to have your video on or off, and each participant will have 2 minutes to interact with the panelists. After all panelists has presented, we will invite Chief Green to join the conversation and open the floor to all questions and comments from you, to include those related to the police department. We know that 2 hours is not nearly enough to address all the questions and comments. If you're unable to ask your question tonight, please feel free to reach out to us by email, mrjea@lansingmishmi.gov, or you may reach out to us to arrange a one-on-one small group meeting at 517-483-4422. This information will also be shown again at the end of the presentation. So if you're ready, let's start the conversation. We will begin with a presentation regarding race relations and challenges in the City of Lansing, to be presented by Dr. Maxie Jackson. Dr. Jackson is a retired associate professor and assistant dean of urban affairs programs at Michigan State University. Before retirement, Dr. Jackson served as associate professor and assistant dean of the graduate school and director of the Center for Urban Affairs at Michigan State University. Welcome, Dr. Jackson, and thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Kim. Lansing's experience as a central city is very similar to other urban centers. Some of these similarities are experiencing economic growth after the World War II era. This economic growth resulted in great migrations from southern states to the north and to the west. Along with this was the development and expansion of our highway systems, the GI Bill benefits providing education, financing, and Veterans Administration home loans. These led to suburban growth and expansion. With the Black migration came redlining neighborhoods that affected the value and desirability of properties in that area, and housing covenants that restricted who could buy homes in that area. These practices negatively impacted communities of color. This was happening throughout the nation, not just in Lansing or in Michigan. In my view, race relation issues in Lansing have not resulted in truly explosive events as they have in many other cities throughout the nation. I think that's because Lansing has a offers decent economic, educational, and political opportunities. Yes, there have been instances of racial unrest and race-related demonstrations. They have been addressed with the involvement of local entities and individuals. I would like to briefly share an experience my wife and I had as a part of a research team that investigated racial segregation and practices of the real estate industry in Lansing. We were one couple that was a part of an 8-couple group. 4 of the couples were moving to Lansing because they had received employment at mid-management levels in state government. The other 4 couples were coming to Lansing because they had received employment at Michigan State work plan. Carrie and I were a couple that were in the latter group. Each 4 groups included 1 white couple, 1 black couple, 1 couple with a white male, black female, and 1 couple with a black male and a white female. As you probably can imagine, none of the black couples were shown houses outside of the area of West Lansing, Churchill Downs, and East Kalamazoo Street. Some of you may recall that when the interstate went through Lansing, it dispersed a solid black community, and this dispersal went to these areas primarily. Obviously, that no longer exists, but at that time, the real estate dealers did not even attempt to show us houses in other areas. Whereas the white participants were shown housing in every area of the state except those three that I mentioned. Apparently and obviously that situation no longer exists. When Willard Walker and Kim Coleman spoke with me about participating in this panel, they talked about this being a journey, not a dash, a marathon. And when I had an opportunity to review the transcript from the first panel, one of the things that jumped out at me was the discussion regarding officers living in the city. I would like to offer a challenge to the city. Police community relations in Lansing have not been ideal, resulting in a culture that will not be changed or eliminated overnight. It is important to recognize that local communities cannot resolve all of the issues regarding negative police community relations. Changes will be required at the state and national levels of government. My challenge specifically is to create incentives for police officers to live in Lansing. I say police officers, but this could apply to firefighters or other entities within the city structure. The following are generally considered benefits of officers living in Lansing where they are charged to serve and protect the citizens of Lansing. If officers live in the city, they become members of the community. The officers develop relationships with their neighbors. The officers develop an understanding and appreciation of their neighbors' issues and concerns. The officers provide a sense of security for their neighbors. And importantly, the officers provide role models for youth in the community. That can potentially become a helpful resource in recruiting new police officers. If we accept and believe that these are real benefits, then why not consider developing an incentive program to encourage officers to live in Lansing? Now, I know that state law prohibits cities from requiring employees to live in the city. We all know that. A couple of examples of potential incentives could include providing financial incentives for officers and their families who live in the city. Another potential incentive could be providing LCC scholarships for the children of these families who attended schools in Lansing. Obviously, it would be important to not do anything that would violate any existing laws or violate any collective bargaining agreements. I believe, should this challenge be accepted, the details of such an incentive program could easily be defined. Finally, if the recommendations from this process are to be achieved, a sustained commitment will be required by the mayor, city council, and key administrators in order to reach the goals emerging from this process. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jackson. Good recommendations. I understand that we do have a program that offers dollars to employees who want to buy homes in Lansing. Right now, not many take advantage of it. Perhaps there's a better way to get the message out there, but I think those were all good suggestions. At this time, we open the floor for any other questions or comments that you might have for Dr. Jackson with regard to his presentation. All right, seeing none, why don't we move on to our next presentation? Thank you, Dr. Jackson. Our next presenter.
Coleman, you do have some hands raised. If you
Oh, I
want
do?
to.
I didn't see them, and I still don't see them. Oh, okay, got it. Thank you for that. Thank you, thank you. We'll invite into the conversation Ashley Bellant. Ashley, welcome to the conversation.
Hello?
There you go. Hi, Ashley.
Hi. My question for Dr. Jackson, I just took note. I know that we're working on what the City of Lansing, what we as the City of Lansing can do right now. And you mentioned, obviously, this is going to take work from the state and national level. When you said that the state of Michigan has a law that you can't require city workers to live in the city that they work in. Was there any, would you suggest maybe that's something that we should advocate to be changed? Or is that like generally regarded as a good idea, or is that something to look at?
In regard to changing the state law?
Yeah.
I suppose that's one possibility. I would imagine it would be quite difficult. Not impossible, but maybe difficult. A brief history of that is, as I understand it, is that this law was pushed primarily by unions who did not want to live in Detroit, wanted to live outside of Detroit. So because Detroit had a requirement that if you work in the city, you had to live in the city. So that law was passed, and I don't remember the year, but it had to be in the 60s or something like 70s. And I would imagine that it would be a strong haul to try to get that law changed. However, I think without having any specific knowledge, I believe that it would be possible to develop an incentive program that would not violate that. If the incentive program was attractive enough that officers would want to take advantage of it, I think that could be done. And it has other advantages as well. If you may recall that when Kalamazoo initiated its education scholarship program for students, a part of the rationale for that was that they wanted to bring people back into the city of Kalamazoo who had moved out. And that increased the tax revenues for the city when those people came back. So there are advantages to this, or benefits beyond the obvious benefits and the desired benefit of having the police officers in the community. We know that community policing has proven to be very successful, and this would be an extension of that, not necessarily a part of it, but an opportunity for officers to live in the city. Specifically in answer to your question, given the political climate, I would estimate that it would be easier to generate an incentive program than to change the legislation.
Okay, thank you. I just wondered about that. So that law covers any worker, not just like government workers.
As far as I know, it does. No city can require any employee to live in the city.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
And Ashley, Mayor Shore would also like to respond to that question. Can we bring or invite Mayor Shore to the conversation?
Maybe. I have to find him. He's not labeled. Just a second.
Okay. And also able to respond to that question is Chief Green. So if you can't find Mayor Shore, know that Chief Green is available. Hi, Chief.
How you doing? I'll just respond to that because I bought my first house in the city of Lansing with that program, the incentive program. It was $5,000 then. This was the early 2000s, and it definitely helped with down payments. And so I got my first house like that. But I'll say this, it has, the incentive has declined, and don't quote me, but I believe it's $3,000 now. So it has steadily gone down, and many officers are not taking advantage. I think, you know, probably it should go up. Housing prices have went up.
Yeah.
And so that's something to think about. And certainly, you know, we're talking about a Michigan Supreme Court case in the 70s. And you're absolutely right, Doctor. Detroit, a lot of the officers in Detroit were moving out to the suburbs, and there was a union fight. And a lot of cities across the country experienced that. Philadelphia experienced that as well. But a lot of cities were able to move the state law in their favor for residency requirements, but not Michigan. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ashley. Great question.
Thanks.
We also have and would like to invite Gwen Coney to the conversation. Gwen Coney, are you with us? She has just gone away. Oh, there she is. Welcome, Gwen. You're on mute.
We did get Mayor Shore in too now, so he can unmute and talk if he would.
Okay, Mayor, before Gwen, Mayor Shore, did you want to comment on the incentives?
Well, thanks, Kim. Sorry, I'm having technology problems myself, so I had to call in. But I think Chief Green addressed it. We do have that program. I want to say it's called LHOPE, and we have funded that every year that I've been mayor. I do believe it's $3,000 per employee, and it's eligible for any city employee. And I'm definitely interested in utilizing that program. So I think that is a very good suggestion in trying to push that out to employees, either employees who will buy a home in Lansing if they're buying a new home, or trying to recruit by using that as a tool. Definitely interested in that. So I think it's a very good suggestion. I also like the education suggestion. Again, we actually have programs where we work with LCC and we work with Davenport and others for tuition, cheaper tuition for our employees. And we do push those programs out quite a bit, but we can certainly use those in recruiting as we try and recruit officers to come work for the city and to live in the city. So I think those are all very good suggestions. I appreciate that. And I just thought I would throw in that information.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you.
Gwen Coney, welcome to the conversation. I believe you're still on mute.
Anymore.
There you go. And you have a question or comment?
Yes, I do. It would be for Dr. Jackson and his conversation on redlining. The current situation with rentals that I've experienced is there's been a not so evident approach to redlining, something consistent with redlining. And it's now the requirements that private landlords are putting on residents that prevent them from going into certain areas. Is there an opportunity for the city to do anything about that? Is this something that can be raised in the city?
I'm afraid I can't answer that question because I really don't know what the city's opportunities and responsibilities would be relative to that private contract exchange. I apologize, but I simply don't, I don't know how to answer that question because of my lack of knowledge about what the city can and cannot do.
Okay, I made that question too broad. I guess I should have minimized it to the fact that you had mentioned redlining.
Mhm.
And I'm introducing the idea that there is still subtle redlining due to the different requirements and eligibility requirements that people of color cannot make due to the positions that they hold. So I guess that is what I'm more or less trying to state, that there is still subtle redlining. And is the City of Lansing also considering that in its planning on how to achieve equity?
Gwen,
Yes.
perhaps myself and the mayor can respond to you.
Yes.
I do know that we are looking at housing. When we put out our survey, we're asking those kinds of questions. We know that from my mind's eye, we don't have 100% control over that. But we certainly are hoping that we can encourage those institutions or those organizations or even those landlords to work with us on those items that have presented themselves as issues within our community to help us working through those issues. Mayor Shore, did you want to comment on this one? And he may still be having technology challenges, but. All right.
Oh, there we go. I got it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, Kim, I agree with that. It's, you know, equity in housing. I mean, as the woman who asked the question, you know, redlining is illegal, but that doesn't mean we don't see pieces of that. We did an inclusion training yesterday, and, you know, there are lots of things that are still done. There's still territorial ratings where people in zip codes with higher crime get charged more, and that usually turns out to be an inequitable. It usually is the minority population who ends out paying more. So we're definitely, we can't change insurance rates, but we are looking at housing policies and making sure that we've got what are called neighborhoods of focus, where we've got 3 of them right now. One of them in Northwest Lansing, which was a traditionally redlined area years ago, and is still seeing the effects of that. So we're putting additional resources into those areas to make sure that we can provide equity for those people, because they have been traditionally kind of kept down, and we need to raise them up. So these are definitely issues that I am very interested in, and I'm glad that they're going to be explored through this process.
Exactly. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Ms. Coney. I'd like to invite to the conversation Jonathan. Welcome, Jonathan, and you are on mute.
All
There
right.
you go.
So thank you, Dr. Jackson, for joining us and sharing your insight. You started by noting economic differences and successes and failures, and it seems that our problems are really rooted in economic disparities. You know, like you, I'm happy that we have good race relations in our cities, but in our city of Lansing. But overall, our democratic republic, it's not perfect. While it's created one of the most fair systems of government and created, you know, it's one of the most successful and prosperous societies on the planet, we still have some ways to go. And we know that we can't and probably shouldn't strive for equal outcomes. That has been tried and failed, but we need, and I think we're morally obligated to give people equal opportunities to achieve healthy, decent lives. And so while our poorest in the country and in Lansing are richer than in much of the world, I think you would agree that you know, we should give them the opportunity to seek good educations and good jobs. So part of one of the biggest indicators of success is coming from a stable, healthy parent household. So how can we as a city encourage people to have healthy homes and maintain healthy homes? Because we know that a child in a broken home is going to be disadvantaged from the start and will be disadvantaged their whole life and will struggle to compete with his peers. What would you suggest to the city?
Well,
Thank you,
that's a difficult question, but let me try two approaches. First, you described a situation throughout your comments that would suggest that we should all be aware that elections have consequences. The answer to most of what you said depends on who sits at the power table in federal government, state government, and local government. And therein, I respond in one way by saying elections have consequences, and it's very important that everyone who has the right to vote exercise that right to vote. I'm not telling anybody who to vote for, but you certainly should exercise that right. Clearly, everyone wants each and every citizen to have an opportunity. It's difficult to say how we can make someone have a two-parent family if that's not the case. But what we can do as individual citizens, provide the support and assistance and nourishment that we can to individuals who we know are in that situation. And we can do this in a number of ways. We can do it through our church, through our other organizations. We can do it through mentoring programs. We can do it through Big Brother, Big Sister programs. But there are myriad ways that we can provide that kind of assistance. But I think a big step is to make sure that we take our responsibility serious about putting the right people in office.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Jackson. Thank you, Jonathan. We will take one more hand and then we'll move on to our next presenter, and that would be Brad Clark. Welcome to the conversation, Brad.
Yes.
And you are muted. Thank you.
Yes, question for Professor Jackson. There's another historical community in Lansing, and that's Hispanics. Do you have data and analogous information for the Hispanic community in Lansing?
I do not have specific data, but I would readily acknowledge that that community experiences the same discrimination that Black community and other communities of color experience as well. I do not have the specific data that you're asking for, but I'm sure that there are places where you can find that. There may be units at Michigan State University that would have this information compiled. On Michigan Avenue, there's an outreach office, 1615 East Michigan Avenue, which is a part of the Michigan State University outreach. I would believe that if you inquired there, they would be able to put you in the right, to direct you to the right source to get the kind of data that you're talking about.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Jackson. Thank you, Brad. And we will move on to our next presenter. Our next presenter is Mr. Joseph Graves. Mr. Graves retired as Chief of Staff for the City of Lansing under the leadership of David Hollister, Mayor David Hollister. Mr. Graves' governmental career also includes Chief Deputy Director, Department of Social Services. He served at the pleasure of Governor Blanchard and Governor Milligan and has contributed significantly in the areas of public health, substance abuse, and rehabilitation reentry services. Thank you, Joe, for being here.
Thank you. For allowing me to participate. I appreciate that a lot. The most significant incident that occurred during my tenure as Chief of Staff for the City of Lansing related to the issue of police and community relations was the death of a young man in the city jail. This incident, or that young man's death, gave rise to a community group led by Reverend Lester Stone called the March for Justice. Our challenge, that is the city's challenge, was to engage these citizens and seek resolution. Which brings me to my first point of emphasis. We must be willing to set in practice a continuous pattern of community engagement. This meeting is just one example of such engagement. A resolution in the case that I just mentioned resulted in the creation of a permanent position referred to as the independent investigator. We put that position outside of the Lansing Police Department to ensure its independence. And this brings me to my second point of emphasis. Changes made should be permanent unless informed by newer best practices. The independent investigator position is funded and on the books today. Let me close with this statement. The city and its partner agencies should maintain a continuous review of policies, practices, procedures, and community engagement strategies. We should always embrace community-driven initiatives and always be willing to sit down with whatever citizen group and try to, one, listen to what they have to say, and then bring resolution if at all possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe. Now it's time for Q&A with regard to police and community relations. Are there questions out there that you might want to ask or comments that you'd like to share? All right, Norma Bauer. I'd like to invite Norma Bauer to the conversation, please. Welcome, Norma. And you are muted.
Okay, thank you very much for allowing me to ask my question. I'm very curious about this independent position because I attended a meeting of the Lansing Police Commission at one point, and I heard the report of that individual who was working full-time at the time. And I since learned that he is independent, but I was somewhat puzzled that he did not report any numbers even about how many complaints there were. He did say that all but 3 or 5 of them were resolved or in the process of getting resolved. And that puzzled me because, I mean, as a citizen of Lansing, understanding how kind of entrenched the police are with almost a get out of jail free about some of these incidents of violence, it's amazing to me that he was able to resolve so many. I mean, what does that say? I will see how the commission put it.
Yes, thank you, Norma. I will attempt to address that one in particular, and perhaps Chief Green may want to pipe in as well. I believe that was probably a situation of just those 2 meetings that you attended where he was present. I don't believe that's going to be an ongoing practice. Reporting numbers is part of that position and part of that responsibility. So you continue to attend, and if you don't hear numbers, please let one of us know, but I'm sure you'll hear numbers going forward. Does that help?
Well, if true, I just, it's still amazing to me.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you, Norma.
Let me comment, Kim.
Mm-hmm.
You know, during my time with the city, I had an opportunity to meet with the independent investigator almost on a weekly basis. We went through the incident reports he had reviewed. He did have data at that time. That was a normal part of his responsibilities. So I'm a little surprised to hear that, you know, data wasn't provided, but that's something that can easily be corrected.
Exactly. And that individual was just starting. He was, I think it was his first 2 meetings. And so he didn't have all of that data at that time. But I assure you, going forward, I can't imagine why the independent investigator wouldn't be able to report on such data. Chief Green, did you want to respond?
Yes, I just want to make sure that it's clear that as chief of police, that particular position does not fall under my supervision at all. I have very limited contact with that individual. You know, the delegation of supervisory responsibilities really falls to the Director of Human Relations and Community Services, as well as the Board of Police Commissioners. So one of the things I did when I became chief of police is we release data monthly on the complaints that come through our office. We put them on the internet. They're in the Lansing Police Department's, the City of Lansing's open data portal. So we release that information, and if it's a sustained complaint, we'll say sustained complaint, and we give the nature of that complaint. We don't put the officers' names down there. That is still an employee issue, and you know there's privacy laws for employees in certain scenarios. But I just wanted to make it clear that the commission investigator does not fall under the Lansing Police Department's chief of police, and I have nothing to do with that position. Thank you.
And I do appreciate your transparency in that, Chief Green, but perhaps I miscommunicated. They got overall data, but they didn't, it wasn't broken down by, this was a case of violence against the city, or a drunken police officer, or destruction of property, or, you know, some the police commissioners don't know why there are so many complaints. And it seems like that's something that they'd want to know. So
Yeah.
That's all. Thank you.
I thank you. We have another hand up, and I believe that hand would be Gwen Coney. Welcome to the conversation, Gwen. I believe you're on mute. Almost. All right.
Okay. I didn't have my hand up for that one. I got in late on the last one for Mr. Graves, but I will stick to the situation. Who is the independent investigator?
Currently, that position is being interviewed for. So the position is vacant at this time.
And relevant to her comments, what would that person's responsibilities be?
There are a number of responsibilities, but the sole responsibilities would be to investigate those complaints that are not referred to, or their comfort level is such that they don't want to refer to internal affairs. So they would be investigating police complaints.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. I see no more hands. We'll move on to the next presenter. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you.
I am very pleased to have a neighboring partner here to present their racial equity and diversity plan. Anita Hitchcock, City Attorney, City of Grand Rapids. Anita began her legal career with the City of Grand Rapids as the Assistant City Attorney and was promoted to the position of Director of Criminal Enforcement. She was a staff attorney for Cooley Law School, where she taught and supervised students in the Public Sector Law Clinic. She has a long history of service to the community and received recognition for diligently working to promote diversity within the justice system for her exemplary leadership and contributions to the greater Grand Rapids community. Welcome, Anita, to our community conversation. We look forward to your presentation on Grand Rapids Racial Equity and Inclusion Plan.
Absolutely, and thank you very much for inviting me to be a part of the significant work that you've embarked upon. The City of Grand Rapids embarked upon the same journey back in 2016 when the city elected its mayor, Rosalind Bliss. In her inaugural State of the City address, with the support of our City Commission, they identified equity as a top priority in her administration. I commend Mayor Shore for doing the same thing, making this a high priority for the City of Lansing. In 2017, Grand Rapids was called out to be one of the worst large U.S. cities for African Americans regarding economics. In our city, more than 40% of African Americans live in poverty. They are 3 times as likely to be unemployed as whites. Hispanics and Latinos are not faring much further or much better. An estimated 35% live in poverty, and they are twice as likely to be unemployed. In the same year, we received a traffic stop study that concluded we were stopping more Black drivers than white drivers or Latinx drivers. In response to that, we prioritized equity. We wanted to be a leader in addressing these disparities. And one way that we did this was by participating in the Living Cities Racial Equity Here initiative. This is through a partnership with the Governmental Alliance on Race and Equity called GEAR. GEAR is where we were selected as one of 5 cities across the nation to take part in the first ever Rio cohort. The other cohorts include Albuquerque, Austin, Louisville, and Philadelphia. So the work that we've done has been extensive, it's been formal, and it continues still to this day. As part of that, we looked at our history, and we had to acknowledge we had achieved a few things over the years, but there was indeed a need for significant change in the area of racial equity. The work of our plan started with an internal focus. We basically said we need to fix ourselves first and really look at addressing our policies, our procedures, and our practices that have and did have a systemic effect on our communities of color. In addition to the internal focus, we provided community training and information regarding the plan and the goal of undoing some of the historical systematic racism that has resulted for people of color in Grand Rapids. We looked at all of our city services, our budget, inclusive engagement efforts, racial equity in the workplace, and supplier diversity, our relationship with our neighborhoods, and youth engagement. The plan was designed to identify specific results, including outcomes, indicators, and actions, which roll into performance measures and accountability. The plan was the building block for various policy and ordinance changes, which were designed to ask the question, who benefits and who burdens from the actions of the city, and to mitigate the harm specifically to our residents of color and residents in our neighborhoods of focus. Portions of the plan were incorporated into our city's overall strategic plan, and equity has guided the actions of our city since the plan was completed. So what's key to the significant and sustainable change in the plan for diversity and equity and inclusion? It must be part of everything that you do. Accountability on all levels is a must. It's imperative that everyone in the organization is committed and all in. It's also important that the community allows a reasonable time for change. We didn't get here overnight, and good, sustainable change can't happen overnight. It is not a one-time event, and then everything's good. we're still working through challenges. It is continuous and forever part of our mission of service. The community has a part in this too, and needs to commit to work with us by being involved and coming to the table with solutions and not just problems. Together we stand, divided we fall. As a short list of some of the changes that we've implemented and assigned specific people to be responsible for accountability, which is extremely important because otherwise you wind up with a plan on paper and you ask the question, is it getting done? Then there's usually no one that has that answer. So we've been very intentional about assigning specific people for each category to make sure that the work is getting done. So some of the things that we've done, and there's a long list, so I'm just going to do some of them. Our racial equity plan, values, vision, and mission statements are shared and published internally and externally. We've provided equity training to all of our employees. We've conducted periodic evaluations of our policies and programs to determine disparate outcomes. We've developed budget process criteria that integrates our racial equity plan. Our departmental budgets don't get approved without having that discussion. We evaluate our funding of programs and services for disparate impact. We prepared and conducted a citywide survey focused on racial equity. We've evaluated the recruitment, selection, and onboarding processes for boards and commissions based on demographics. We've transformed the city's hiring process to remove barriers and increase diversity of candidates and increased our outreach in neighborhoods of focus. We've created marketing material that can be easily understood and represents an accurate cross-section of our community. We've collected and analyzed data to identify gaps in contracting and procurement so we could access barriers to racial equity. We've assessed our current economic incentives through racial equity lens to make necessary changes to advance racial equity and economic equity in our neighborhoods. For our youth, we have the Mayor's Youth Council, To School Through School, the Youth Police Academy, and the Fire Explorers Program. This year, we've implemented an internship program for high schoolers supported by our area businesses. The plan is a roadmap to guide our work and ensure that we're doing the best that we can do for all of our residents. We're a couple of years ahead of you in this journey, but I don't want you to be misled that all is well. It's a lot of work and it's ongoing. The challenges that we had before the plan did not go away because of the plan. They remain. Community and police relations is currently a great body of work for us as well. Some of the recent things that we've done is we've reviewed our use of force policy and reviewed it and amended it to include the 8 Can't Wait concepts. We required our police chief to render a strategic plan. We've all heard a lot of this discussion about defund the police, and we've heard some of the things that people would like to see as far as transferring money from the police department into other things like mental health and other factors, all of which I can't think of right now. But nonetheless, our chief's strategic plan incorporated a lot of those things that our community says that they're interested in having. For transparency, we've added a dashboard of stats and data for accountability to our community. Our police chief now has a citizens advisory group he meets with regularly. All of our officers have had implicit bias training. And we too have an internal affairs department, but we also have a civilian appeals board for complaints, which is a group of citizens that if a person or an officer wants to appeal the decision of the internal affairs, they can appeal to the civilian appeals board. We also added this year an oversight and accountability office, and that person is independent from the police department and answers to the city manager. We're still having challenges with affordable housing. That continues to be a mountainous task for us. We're continuing to have challenges with inclusion and equity programs, mainly because it's an ongoing process as time and demands change. We're still having challenges with economic development. With reliance on state and federal funding, it remains a challenge. Recruiting and retention of employees of color remains a struggle despite our great efforts. But I have to applaud us that there's more diversity, and I've been in the city of Grand Rapids all of my life. I've been with the city as an organization for almost 20 years now, and there's more diversity within the city hall than I've ever seen in my entire life here. Again, I applaud your efforts in this and wish you much success. Please don't hesitate to use the City of Grand Rapids as a source. Our diversity and inclusion manager, we have an office dedicated to this, and our manager has been here for 20 years. We're available to share what we know with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Anita. That's great information, and thank you for sharing. Are there questions specifically for Anita with regard to the Grand Rapids Racial Equity Plan? I'd like to invite into the conversation Jonathan.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for joining us. What concrete numbers can you provide that shows the successes of some of these programs? For example, have young Black men led more successful lives, had better economic outcomes due to your diversity programs? For example, are they achieving, do they have a higher standard of living? They're making $100,000 as opposed to, say, $20,000. Are they getting more degrees that are being used? Are people safer in their households? Are people committing less crimes? Are more families sticking together? What could you provide in terms of numbers, and what kind of successes have you had?
Okay, so unfortunately, I can't give you those numbers today, but and we probably don't have all of those numbers, but the numbers that we do have, I can request that from our Diversity and Inclusion Office, because we are required to measure. We have to be able to every year report outcomes. It's required of us. So if you allow me, I can ask for that information, get it to Ms. Coleman, and perhaps you can make a connection to be able to get that information to him. Give me at least a couple of days though.
And Jonathan, you just need to reach out to the Human Relations Community Services Department, and we'll have that information available to you once we receive it, okay?
I appreciate that. I'd love to see what kind of best practices the city might want to pursue and avoid practices that were not successful in Grand Rapids.
Very good. Thank you.
Absolutely. That's a good point.
Brad Clark, I'd like to invite you to the conversation, please. Thank you. Brad Clark. Very good. And you are currently muted.
Yes, a question for Ms. Hitchcock. What provisions do you make in your racial equity plan for minority groups other than Blacks, such as Asians or Hispanics?
Well, we don't talk just Black. Our focus is always on all of our citizens. So we have a very diverse population in Grand Rapids. We have a huge immigrant population. And so when we talk about residents of Grand Rapids, which is why we don't say citizens of Grand Rapids, we say residents of Grand Rapids. And we're focused on all of our citizens. That's why I said, when we look at like our boards and commissions, we invite people based on demographics. We try to incorporate people from all of our wards. We're set up in 3 wards. And so we're constantly making sure we have representation from all of our wards. And so we hear voices from all of our residents.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Brad. We'll take one more hand. Linnaeus, I invite you to join the conversation. And if I mispronounce your name, please correct me. Welcome to the conversation, Linnaeus. And your question or comment would be? Linnaeus? All right, perhaps we should go on to the next speaker, and we can pick up your question the next time around. So there'll be another opportunity for you. Thank you, Anita, and we'll move on to the next presenter.
Thank you, Kim.
At this time, I'd like to introduce Attorney Teresa Bingman, a local attorney and an expert consultant on racial justice and equity. Teresa operates law offices of Teresa A. Bingman and serves in several other capacities as a consultant and advisor. She has extensive experience in government, education, and private sectors, having consistently championed civil rights, urban and criminal justice policy issues since starting her legal career in 1988. I just want to say before she comes on, thank you, Teresa, for answering the call. Thank you for all you've done and will do for us going forward as we prepare for developing and implementing our racial justice and equity plan. Teresa.
Thank you, Director Coleman. It's my pleasure. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. I'm very excited to talk with you about now and the future. In this age of racial justice and equity, it is now our time to do the right thing, using all of our thoughts and our experiences from the past in order to shape today and the future. So you have heard about some of the history of race relations in Lansing from Dr. Jackson and Mr. Joe Graves. We all know that their experiences and their roles over the years have helped all of us remain on a road that we have been traveling for quite some time in the name of racial justice and equity. And I'm here to say that we all must keep working hard to create that space where we can all feel a sense of respect and dignity and not be judged in a negative way because of our race. It's very refreshing to hear how the city of Grand Rapids is out front in this movement. Attorney Anita Hitchcock is a racial justice and equity warrior. We respect the great work that she and the folks in Grand Rapids are doing, and we appreciate her willingness to share this pertinent information with us as we start this part of our journey. You all probably know that people who serve in these types of roles in city government have to show up to work every day, ready to weather the storm. Despite the honorable work that they're doing, there are often storms that they face. It's not an easy job. So thank you, Attorney Hitchcock, for sharing this valuable information with us. The strides that Grand Rapids has made are meaningful and impactful, and we will continue to learn from Grand Rapids and other cities who are on this path to doing the right thing. So let me tell you a little bit about the work that we're doing here in Lansing. You've heard the narrative from the mayor on the video presentation. You've heard from Kim Coleman, you've heard from Chief Green, you've heard from a myriad of presenters. We are doing all of this to make sure that we receive input from you and that we provide information to you that is relevant. Just because this is our last town hall meeting for now this is not the end of our acceptance of input. So we have talked about the Mayor's Racial Justice and Equity Alliance, the MRJEA. This is the group of advisors who the mayor has appointed to provide advice to him through this process. I was elated to have attended their inaugural meeting earlier this week. There's a lot of enthusiasm and more wisdom and experience than you can imagine. And I'm not only grateful for these individuals who are volunteering their time and their talent, very thankful that some of them have joined every single town hall meeting. They're ready to go to work, and their work has commenced. So along with the mayor, Chief Green, and Director Coleman, I will be working to help guide this process. We do have a strategy in place, and we will follow that strategy. And when we need to make adjustments, we will do so, because our end goal is to have some outcomes, some deliverables, something tangible that the city can look at and say, this is a policy that has changed, that is fair, it's non-discriminatory, and I can participate in this program. I could apply for this job and have an opportunity to receive the job. So I was pleased to hear that Dr. Jackson came to us with one of his recommendations tonight. And that's something that we definitely heard and will continue to process. So those of you who have joined us for this meeting only, and those of you who have joined us for one or two of the other meetings, we want to say thank you. And we want to say that we want to continue to keep you engaged. And we will do that by receiving your emails, your telephone calls, inviting you to put together focus groups for us to engage with. And we are open to your input until the end of September. At the end of September, we will gather all of the data, quantitative, which would be the information we receive from the electronic surveys that are out there, qualitative, your stories, your experiences, your questions and answers to your questions, such as the ones that you are sharing with us through this forum, and every other piece of data that we receive through research and input from other individuals and entities. And that's when the MRJEA will start to put together the plan. So beginning in October of 2020, following through January of 2021, the MRJEA will be structuring this plan, and they will also be providing information and advice to the Police Commission related to possible police reform. So I want to say that we will have a final phase after January, beginning in February. Mr. Mayor, that's when the real work begins. When you have the plan, you have the reform recommendations. We know that you and your cabinet will work hard to implement policies, practices, and procedure changes that are recommended and accepted by the MRJEA. We also know that your office will respectfully engage the City Council throughout the process, because we know that these changes may require changes to city ordinances and city charter changes, as well as some internal policy changes. So on a final note, please know that we will provide updates to the community periodically as we commence through this process. And if you ever have any questions or input, please contact us. The contact information will appear on the screen at the end of this meeting. And I want to leave you with the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. from a speech titled, "The Fierce Urgency of Now." And I quote, "We are now faced with the fact that tomorrow is today. We are confronted with the fierce urgency of now. In this unfolding conundrum of life and history, there is such a thing as being too late. There is no time for apathy or complacency. This is a time for vigorous and positive action." Thank you and good evening.
Thank you, Teresa.
You're welcome.
The time is now. At this time, I'd like to invite the panel members back to the conversation. Chief Green, please join us. If there's an opportunity for members of the community to ask questions with regard to the plans, please raise your hand and we will invite you into the conversation. I see several hands.
Director Coleman, you're muted.
Well, it's probably a good idea to come off, huh? Thank you. At this time, and I think everybody probably, you must have read my lips. Please join the conversation. Elaine Bischoff. Now would be the time to ask questions of the panelists with regard to the overall racial equity plan.
Hello, this is Elaine Fischoff, and I have two questions for Dr. Bingman. My first question is, when you were first appointed by the mayor, he indicated that you were going to be doing an environmental survey. So I'm curious what you understood that to mean or what he told you that it meant. And my second question is, are you going to go beyond consideration of police practices? In 2019, the University of Michigan issued a study assessing areas of environmental justice in Michigan, and Lansing was one of the top 5 cities in terms of having census tracts reflecting environmental injustice. So I'm curious whether that'll be part of what you're going to be looking at, and if so, to what extent?
Yes, thank you. Ms. Fischoff, are you an attorney?
Yes.
I thought I knew your name from my past, so thank you so much for joining us for these meetings. And yes, we have received your input about your interest in environmental justice, and we're interested in that as well. But I must say, I just want to clarify what the mayor was talking about in terms of an environmental scan. The environment, in the way that we were using it in this strategic practice world, is to scan the internal environment within the city and the external environment within the community. So these input sessions and all the data that we're gathering is part of that environmental scan. But yes, we understand the importance of environmental justice. That is an issue that we will be taking to the MRJEA to consider when they start to assess the input that we've received. So we thank you for that input.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm still on mute. Yeah, I am still muted. All right, we now invite Ashley Belloff to the conversation. Hi, Ashley. Welcome to the conversation.
Hi, I already spoke earlier. I just was curious, after listening to Anita speak, I know you mentioned you put in all these changes, and you did mention the calls for defunding or divesting from the police. Was that a part at all? Was there any like divestment from police into other areas? Was that included in your plan a couple years ago? And I guess that's my question.
And your question is
Sorry?
Who would your question be directed to?
Oh, Anita. I was wondering if because she had mentioned that. I wondered if they had done any of that.
Thank you.
No, we have not done that. This is recent discussion. So by our charter, we we have to fund our police department at least 32% of our operating fund. And so they're higher than that right now. I think they're about 39%. And the part of the community wants us to defund it and drop it to 32%. Part of the concern is that we have already approved our budget for the this current year, which started July 1st. And so when they put a motion, we had a motion on the table, but it wasn't part of the agenda, so we couldn't fully discuss it. And the other issue with that is by law, you have to have a plan. You have to be able to say where you're taking the money from and where the money's going. And so we've not had those types of discussions yet. You just can't say cut it and go about your business, but we have an obligation. There's state law that requires us and sets out the process for us in doing our budget. And so we are still having those, having those discussions, because we still have community members coming to our meetings asking for that. But thus far, the commission has not had that put on the agenda as a discussion.
Okay, I just wondered because you had mentioned it, so thank you.
Thank you, Ashley. Attorney Bingman, I do have a question for you with regard to our plan, and that is community engagement is a big thing for us. And we also heard Joe Graves talk about the importance of engagement. Does our strategy seek to engage the broader community in this effort? We are doing some things to learn about the needs, but how about their ability to be involved? Talk a little bit about the work groups.
Yes, I agree with Mr. Graves that community engagement should be continuous. Without the community, we wouldn't have a city. So we have built in accessibility. That's one of the features of this plan that we're working on. We will remain very accessible, as I explained earlier. Although we're finished with this series of town hall meetings, we will be providing updates, and we are accessible at any time to receive the input from the community. We still need their stories, experiences, and recommendations for us. So yes, that's definitely a part of this. It will remain in place.
And the breakdown of the work groups. How are we breaking down the work groups, and how might people get involved?
Yes, so there are work groups that are part of the plan that function under the MRJEA. They will be led by members of the MRJEA. And so there are subcommittees that include arts and culture, communities and neighborhoods, education, health, housing, jobs and economic development, and public safety. Anyone who's interested in being a part of those work groups should contact us. If you have experience, ideas, energy to bring some positive results to any of these sectors, we need you. We're inclusive. And so please just let us know. You'll see the contact information and we will get back in touch with you.
And then other ways that people might be able to make contributions would be by way of focus groups and one-on-ones that we're willing to do.
Yes, yes. And we also want to incorporate the stories of some of our community organizations. I was at a service earlier this week, and there was a presentation by the leader of one of our hospitals, and he talked about diversity and inclusion and their commitment to it. Not only was that music to my ears, I knew the history of this organization and their diversity and inclusion, but we need to hear more of that, and we need to engage those people to help inform our plan. This is not about just internal City of Lansing. We're looking at Lansing as a whole. So that's another way to contribute. Some of you who are with us now are part of an organization that's doing some great things, and you could have recommendations for us that could be very valuable. We want to hear from you.
Thank you. I'd like to invite into the conversation Julie Kramer. Welcome, Julie. I'm sorry, Julia.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello. Thank you all for doing this. This has been really interesting. I just want to say I appreciate the question to Anita from Grand Rapids about defunding the police. That is a more recent ask that's coming out of various communities, including ours. And I understand that that needs to be incorporated in the budgeting process. And we do currently have a resolution with our city council that would start a process of us figuring out how to defund our police and actually doing it within the timeline of our city budgeting process. So I just want to voice my support for that resolution. And I'm really hoping that that is going to make it through the bureaucracy in time to be part of our next city budgeting process. And yeah, I don't have a question. I just wanted to make sure to voice that support in this arena. And thank you guys for all the work that you're doing. I hope to stay actively involved with this process.
Thank you, Julia. We would now like to invite James Denning to the conversation. Welcome, James. And you are currently on, there you go.
Hi.
Hi.
My question was in relation to jobs and economic development. It's like a new, seems like a new racial equity issue. And it's almost like the mayor and the city council kind of created it. Maybe it was unknowingly, but with, and I'll try to briefly touch on it, and then I'll try to go through the channels to work with whoever I need to further touch on it. But in regards to recreational marijuana, it's almost like that industry has been gentrified from the traditional people that participated in it. And I say that because historically, I've been living in Lansing for 23 years. I moved away for college and had a job for a few years after that. But since I was about 15 years old, like, the person that sold marijuana for recreational purposes, whether it was legal or not, was always somebody that was Black. And with the creation of the new laws and ordinances, that's like almost instantly changed overnight just because of legislation that's been put in place. And basically, my question is, how do the panel members feel about that subject? And for the mayor, is he willing to look at the ordinances in the legislature, to revisit it and look at what's actually been put in place and the impacts of it, and consider changes to it?
Thank you. Thank you, James. Mayor Shore, would you care to respond?
Thanks, Kim. Thank you for the question. This was certainly something that came up when we considered the ordinance that was passed, I want to say last year. I know one of the council members talked about equity. I mean, right now, the way it works is you have to have a certain amount of money, you have to have security, you have to have ventilation and things like that in order to get a dispensary license or to create a grow. So there are regulations, but I don't disagree with you that it's you've got wealthier people who are able to get some of these licenses. And I know there was a conversation about equity. I'm open to that. It's something that City Council may look to take up, and I'm open to, especially local, wanting to make sure that we have local businesses. So right now, everybody applies and they get scored, and whoever gets scored the highest for our 25 licenses for marijuana grows, or our number of licenses for marijuana grows and 25 licenses for dispensaries. It's a blind scoring system, but there is the option to include additional points for different statuses. And again, equity I know was raised at the time, and whether the city clerk or the city council really wants to amend that ordinance, I'm certainly willing to have that discussion. I appreciate you raising that issue. It's certainly important.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, James. Would anybody else like to respond or comment?
So I can respond a little bit. So part of the bigger issue is getting through the state, because the state really controls in this, and they're the ones who have a big dollar amount on getting through. So we're able to regulate only through zoning. So through zoning, we can do the best that we can do in requiring companies that come in to show us, plans on how they're going to consider equity. Are they, hire so many things like hire so many employees of colors. And when you have to do it to not get in trouble, you have to do it in a voluntary manner. And so I think people don't really understand the dynamics of this. The local government has very little that they can do. We can only regulate through zoning. But you're not just going to go through the city, you also got to go through the state and go through their approvals and all of their restrictions, which is making it difficult for the local people to really get into it. So we've had to be really creative in our processes of what we require some of these companies to do. One of the things, a couple of things that we're doing now is we're talking about, and it's kind of innovative on our part, but I'll share it because we've talked about it publicly, is to do a nonprofit, like cities can do a nonprofit. And under the nonprofit, then we can do some of those things that our commission wants us to do, like making sure that there's jobs, or making sure that we set up certain parameters that allow like education and businesses, things for people outside of the big businesses to be able to get in on it. But one thing I'd say consider is don't just consider the core of marijuana, but consider being supplier, if you will. And what I mean by that, many years ago, I worked for Steelcase, and there's a company that provided us these screws and washers. Well, they were $1 million company supplying the screws and washers. They weren't Steelcase doing the furniture, but they were a supplier to Steelcase. And that's one of the things that I recommend with the marijuana business as well, is consider doing some of the ancillary businesses and not just the core businesses. Think about transportation. Transportation is a lot easier to get into than the dispensaries. So kind of just broaden your a base of how you can get into the industry other than the core of selling in a dispensary.
Thank you, Anita. James, I hope that answered your question.
Not really. It kind of got off topic. I was really focused solely on the ordinances that the City Council of Lansing and the mayor put in place, because like the fee for Lansing, like that's something they can control. And like, so I'm also a caregiver. So the closest business you can start to get into that industry that's related to being a caregiver will be a marijuana micro business. So it is like, I think that the ordinance is that there's only one micro business license allowed per ward. Mm-hmm. And I was shocked when I looked up how many wards Lansing has, which is 4. Mm-hmm. So that kind of really limits, and it like almost completely cuts out everybody that actually really built the whole marijuana industry in Lansing. So I was really just focused on what they could affect because I believe there are things they could affect.
Well, thank you, James. You probably have a few more, or might be looking for a few more specifics than we're able to give you on this call, but you're certainly welcome to get a hold of us in HRCS, and we'll do the best we can to get information, if there is any, to answer your question.
Okay,
and you can reach us at 483-4422. Thank you. I would like to invite Tanisha Terry to the conversation, please. Welcome, Tanisha, and you are muted.
Hello, and thank you. You're going to have to forgive me because I was kind of doing something while listening to the last caller, but it made me have some questions.
You are a little difficult to hear, Tanisha. Can you raise your volume?
I said, you're going to have to forgive me because I was doing some things while listening to the other caller, but it did bring up some questions in my mind.
Okay, and what questions do you have?
Why can't there be more licensing for the marijuana industry? And then why can't we defund, as the way we're using it, and the police defund the marijuana business and you tax them and use that money to allocate for the cities?
Is there anybody on the call that can respond to Tanisha's question? Tanisha, you might be asking for a little bit more than what we have available on this call as well. Not that we want to not answer your question, but we may need some other people involved.
I just feel as though trying to defund the police is not the right thing to do. And since marijuana seems to be a growing industry and the government is more than willing to tax on them, why can't we take that money and allocate it to needed communities?
I hear you. I hear you. I hear you. Good idea. It would probably have to be explored further, but thank you for being involved.
Thank you.
I'd like to invite Jonathan to the conversation, please.
So a couple of questions, and I'll try to direct it appropriately, maybe to, I believe, Mr. Graves and Chief Green. So the LPD must be funded. That's clear. Funding for other programs needs to be found elsewhere. Defunding is not an option. But you need to be funded to be able to carry out the mission of protecting the citizens' constitutional rights. And all of this really, it all boils down to the reason why we're having this conversation is abuse of people's constitutional rights. So how have you, gentlemen, or anybody else on the call, what have you seen in recent history that would constitute as abuses in the city of Lansing by the LPD? I mean, what has been done about it if these cases have happened? For example, firing officers or just handing them over to prosecutors. And how are you trying to ensure citizens' rights? And then the other one is a piggyback on other speakers. This is some separate issue, possibly to the mayor. I was interested in Mr. Denning and Ms. Terry's ideas. How is the city helping citizens come together and do things like open up co-ops? Micro businesses are fine, but people could come together with and pool their resources to open up businesses that they wouldn't otherwise be able to do as individuals. More people can buy in with less money. Mr. Denning might want to go into business with some of his friends, and if the city could figure out a way to help him get such a business off the ground, that might be very beneficial to him. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. I know that we have included, I believe, economic development as one of our work groups. Teresa, am I right about that?
Yes, that's correct, Director Coleman.
So there may be an opportunity to explore some of what Jonathan was just talking about during group work, once we're able to gather information. We have quite a survey out there that asks a number of questions in some of those related areas. And while it may be comprehensive, it allows us to gather information with regard to some of the things that you have just mentioned, Jonathan. So I say that to say that there may be more information coming and maybe other opportunities to be creative about the way we handle these things. I don't know if anybody else has any other comments to make with regard to Jonathan's question.
I would only comment that as it relates to excessive force issues, frankly, during my tenure, there weren't a lot of reports of excessive force. I think that's probably true today. I guess I'd just like to remind the audience that while there are clearly issues of systemic racism in Lansing and perhaps on the police department, but I don't believe that the number of cases as it relates to excessive force have been a significant issue in Lansing.
Thank you.
I'm happy to hear that, sir.
Thank you, Jonathan. And thank you for participating.
If I could just one alibi to Jonathan's question. Great question. Thank you very much. Obviously, oversight and accountability is the premier thought when we think about use of force. And arguably, you could have the best policies in the country. However, it's the enforcement piece of those policies and procedures that provide the oversight and accountability you're looking for when you discuss use of force, particularly excessive uses of force. And obviously, I'm responsible for some of that. We seek out the best policies and procedures, and we have a police transparency page where you can take a look at our policies directly correlating to use of force. We consider our use of force as response to resistance. And I will say this, body-worn cameras that we implemented early in 2016 as a result of the Obama administration's 21st Century Policing Task Force. One of the recommendations of that committee under the direction of Chuck Ramsey. We implemented those cameras in 2016, and as a result of Ferguson, as a result of the protests down in Baltimore. And a lot of times, and primarily the majority of the times that we do get complaints, we're able to resolve those complaints very easily because we have actual real-time video. The video cameras don't capture everything, but certainly they have been a prominent component in addressing the oversight accountability. We also have an early warning system. All of our complaints, if anyone makes a complaint directly to the police, it goes into a system called Blue Team. And that Blue Team system funnels an investigation. We will review all the video. We will take statements. We will reach a conclusion. And again, they mentioned the complaint investigator as well, that is outside of the police department. And that is an entity as well if a person believes that their complaint was not resolved appropriately. But the point I want to make is the oversight and the accountability has to be in place with strong policies and procedures in place to hold officers accountable. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. All right, at this time, I'd like to invite Linda Rose to the conversation. Welcome, Linda. And you are muted. There you go.
Thank you. I want to thank all of the panel members for their participation in this presentation tonight. I am particularly thankful for the presentation by Ms. Hitchcock because she has highlighted the need for realistic expectations and for ongoing commitment when we're talking about major change within a large organization. It's simply not possible to turn things around on a dime. I've worked in large organizations for years, and I've seen the difficulties that have gone on within the state of Michigan is where my experience is. The difficulties that people have gone through in attempting to implement systemic changes. So it takes commitment across generations and across administrations in order to make these things work. And the folks who are, particularly the politicians, the elected people who are calling for defunding the police by X% by such and such a date, and these sorts of ill thought out knee-jerk reactions, I suggest that we think carefully about our vote when these people are up for review again, because this kind of thing deserves careful and constant consideration rather than attempting to make one's political career based on some kind of knee-jerk reaction. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Linda Rose. Did you have any question for us, or were you just wanting to share a comment?
Just sharing a comment. Thank you so much.
We appreciate hearing from you. Thank you for being on the call. I would invite Norma Bauer to the conversation, please. Norma Bauer. And you are muted. There you go. Oh, you're still muted. Yes.
Again?
Okay.
Okay. I just want to thank this impressive group of people who's carrying this whole initiative forward. But I also want to say thank you for telling us that there is a housing aspect to the whole thing, because I have worked with homeless people, I've worked in shelters. I have a clue about what police officers deal with at the end of our human services delivery system and so many other injustices. My presenting, so I've only been here since since 2002, so not very long. But as I drove along Mount Hope Avenue, I was pleased to see the diversity that we're all so proud of. You know, businesses, housing, some good, some not so good. And everybody living together, you know. But in these days of gentrification, I find it to be a conflicting issue for cities. And I'm talking mainly about cities across the country. I don't really know specifics about Lansing, but all cities need more money. And if some rich people want to gentrify some rundown housing in high density parts of downtown, because millennials and younger like to have walkable communities, all of a sudden we have more homeless people. And then we could bring on about the landlord tenants. I'm personally acquainted with a landlord who evicted a tenant who pays every single month because she has a cat. Well, she also has mice. So I don't know if he expects her to tame the mice. You know, she had a ceiling fall in over her kitchen area while she was sleeping, thank God. We don't need more homelessness, you know, it's always housing first. And I hope that the team addresses these issues, because I find it unfair for the police to have to resolve everything that's unjust in the healthcare system and so many other criminal justice, you know, it's just not there. So, and if I can join that team, I would be grateful.
Well, you let us know if you would like to join that team. Just reach out to our department and we'll get you tied in. Chief Green, did you want to respond to her comments at all?
No, I was just acknowledging her comments, and the strength of those words was just impressive, and I definitely concur with those comments.
Absolutely. Thank you, Norma, and thank you for being here. I'd like to invite Nancy Malo to the call or to the conversation, please. Welcome, Nancy. And you are muted.
There we go. Okay. Thank you, everyone, for the opportunity to be a part of this. A couple of areas in related to what Norma said about housing. I would like to see our realtors and our landlords become a part of some type of discussion. I was recently told about an individual who was looking for to move to the area because of his job. And the comment that was made by a realtor was, "Oh, you don't want to live in Lansing." And that was just one realtor. We have outstanding realtors in our city, but for that to be mentioned to this individual was not acceptable. And the same applies with our landlords. You have sections of our city where the rent is, you can take the same size house, same number of bedrooms, same footage and everything, and on one side of the city, it will be 2 to 3 times the amount of rent that it would be on another side of the city. And I'm sorry, but these landlords, and I've said it before, they're making a living on human lives. I mean, why are they in the landlord business if they're not making money? And again, this is no disrespect because we do have some outstanding landlords. But I think that from a city's perspective, we need to take a better look and work more closely with our realtors and our landlords so that we have better conditions and promoting our city in a more positive way. And the last thing is, as far as defunding our police budget, I know I have been one of the individuals who have said for several years that city council needs to take a better look at the complete city budget. I think we have some wasted spending, and we have one social worker who has been doing an outstanding job with our police department, and we could probably use 3 or 4 more of her. This has definitely been an eye-opener on both sides, not only for her working with our police, but our police working with her. But I don't think it needs to come from the police budget. Maybe one thing with the resolution, if there is a positive side, is it has brought us the communication forward to talk about it. So I thank you for the opportunity to speak, and I look forward to more of the conversation. Thank you.
And I thank you, Nancy. Thank you for being here. It is 7:27, and I look to begin to wrap up. So I'd like to just say thank you to all of you for being on the call. This does conclude our 3rd community conversation for this evening. And while we only had 3 scheduled, just know that there will be others because we look forward to keeping you informed. There are things that we're going to learn that we'd like to share. There are plans and directions that we hope to go into that we'd like to hear your feedback on. And so at the point when we're ready and the committee has begun to do its work, just know that you will be involved if you're not assigned already. I want to extend my heartfelt thanks to our presenters, our City of Lansing support staff. A special thank you to the citizens of Lansing for your participation. We look forward to the next time. Thank you.